Ladies and gentlemen, we're literally in the seventh inning stretch here on the CSPC. Here it is Friday afternoon, and wow, look at the audience. So let me just begin by saying on behalf of our panel, thank you enormously for sticking around. A theme that's been consistent through the last 3 days is we seem to live in different times. The confluence of crises that are out there seem to be complex, accelerating, and what on earth does it mean to us all? And in this panel, we're going to be exploring how the science, technology, and innovation ecosystem for our country could aspire to be a contributor to helping Canada adapt. In some ways, it's addressing the challenge of the CSP strategic plan of addressing systemic fragmentation. Now, how is the afternoon going to unfold? First, I'd make you aware that if you go to the app under this particular panel, you will find two things. First off, you will find a discussion paper authored by ICI Canada that has the provocative title, "It's Time to Reimagine Canada's STI Ecosystem." As well, you will find a tab at the top that's called Polling. And as we transition from our conversation to an engagement with you, there are 3 questions that we'd ask you to respond to. They're simple. They play to the theme. And I'd ask you to kind of wait until we get to that point to answer it so you've had the benefit of the conversation with the panelists. So with that, how's the afternoon going to unfold? And let me begin by introducing our panelists, 4 impressive Canadians who each bring a somewhat different set of life experiences to the question for our panel. We have Sue Page, just as I go across from your left to right, we have Sue Page. Hello, Sue. Sue is currently the CEO of the Digital, that's in capital letters, Digital Supercluster, headquartered in Vancouver. We have Sherelle Evelyn, who is the managing editor of the Hill Times. Sherelle, you look very, very familiar because I so frequently see you on the Power and Politics on CBC at supper time and offering pithy observations on Canada's political scene. So great to have you with us here. We have Duncan Retson. Duncan is an associate ADM in the Public Services and Procurement Canada for science and parliamentary infrastructure, and essentially setting up Canada's internal intramural science for success by having the right tools to work. Great to have you here, Duncan. And I have another Duncan with me today, Duncan Stewart, a dear friend and colleague for many years. Duncan is our venture capitalist and investment partner with the Business Development Bank of Canada's Deep Tech Venture Fund. By design, this panel is eclectic. The intent to bring varying perspectives to the problem at hand to enrich our conversations. 2 of our panelists have lived their professional career inside the STI ecosystem. That's Duncan Stewart and Sue. And 2 of our panelists come from an outside perspective, perhaps looking in and out, and that's across, and that's, of course, Sherelle and Duncan Retson. And so we should see quite a diverse set of perspectives that hopefully will come together with a story. I will highlight, this isn't scripted. We have not pre-positioned detailed questions beyond the 3 you're going to see. I'm not quite sure how this is going to unfold. I am looking forward to the exciting conversation and, importantly, the conversation with you folks after this roundtable. So let me begin with essentially 4 slides to give you a summary of that discussion paper that you can get through the app. And the place to start with what on earth is he talking about with global polycrisis? Now, some of you may be familiar with this language, but let me do a shout out to Professor Thomas Homer Dixon and Cascade Institute here in Canada, which has provided thought leadership on the concept here, which is an elegant shorthand for recognizing that the world is experiencing perhaps a unique inflection point where we have these concurrent, interdependent global crises that have global, national, and local impacts. They play on one another. And so whether it's climate change and biodiversity loss, or technology disruptions with AI being the current and just behind it, quantum, pandemics and mass migrations, geopolitical conflict, wealth redistribution, supply chain disruptions, high inflation, lagging productivity, poor affordability, social polarization, my head hurts. That is a reality. What does it mean for Canadians? The core message, of course, is the polycrisis is here. This isn't something about tomorrow. It's happening today. Canadians are experiencing the impacts of this polycrisis in diverse ways. The public, citizens, communities, governments, the business sector, and I'm not going to get into the list. The list is not intended to be exhaustive, but just giving examples of the way this is real for people today. And the projections by those that study the polycrisis saying, you haven't seen anything yet. Now, let's not roll up in a fetal ball, put our heads under a blanket and say, I want this all to go away. It's a reality that's happening. The question is, what do we do about it? And there's an argument to be made, and I think it's been a thread throughout the past 3 days, that the Canadian STI ecosystem can actually be a key contributor to helping the country adapt. But to do so is going to require change. It's going to require a new way of thinking, another phrase that I've heard repeated consistently throughout the last 3 days. We at the ICI believe that the key is about innovation. Innovation at scale and pace. Innovation that recognizes that Canada's economic, environmental, social, and security well-being depends on being able to find solutions at the pace at which challenges emerge. If you look across the OECD, many nations have begun the journey of transforming their national STI ecosystems to respond. Now, we've also known that Canada has had a lackluster performance in translating the results of our research into innovative benefits for citizens. And that is the case today, but let's just make sure we're not trying to solve yesterday's problem. Let's think about what we want to do in the context of this global polycrisis as the urgent call to action. And so our thesis is that, in fact, there is both an opportunity and urgency to reimagine this ambition. And as Einstein said, the essence of it is about finding the new way of thinking that steps outside the kind of thinking that got us to where we are. And so one way of approaching this, and this is a straw dog proposal, and we'll see what our panelists think about this, is to find a framework for establishing and sharing among us a sense of purpose, a sense of the scale and scope of what we're trying to accomplish, a sense of how we translate what we do into impacts that improve the quality of life of Canadians. This is not a governance construct. This is not a top-down management framework. It is intended to be an inclusive big tent in which we can all of us see ourselves, but adapting to a culture and a way of thinking that drives towards success. A purpose where Canada's STI ecosystem should be positioned as a, catch this term, strategic national asset with shared goals, goals within the system, goals with the public, with the governments, and importantly with citizens, the private sector, that we will help Canadians adapt, manage the risks, capture the opportunities from this intersecting social, economic, technological, environmental, and security dimensions of this strengthening polycrisis. Individually, of course, not each one of us is not trying to solve all of that. We all have a piece of the action. Scope. As a nation, Canada must ensure that its STI ecosystem enables, and here's the term again, citizen-centric innovation. It matters for our Canadian citizens, our communities, and we must do it at the scale and pace by generating and harnessing the three vectors of knowledge, technology, and talent that both respond and create opportunities. And finally, it's about understanding the path to uptake. How do we translate, how do we adopt these outputs into outcomes through better and innovative policy and regulations, through jobs, through products, services, critical infrastructure, and when you add it all up, you take it together, you create a resilient and adaptable response. It improves the lives of our citizens, and it provides a sustainable and secure future for all. That's an ambition. Start with an ambition, and then have the conversation on how do we get there. To do that, which is the focus of our discussion with my colleagues on the panel, we are going to approach this through three conversations. The first is what concerns you most about the global polycrisis, and where might it have the greatest impact on citizens and institutions, and are there also opportunities? A round table. From that, a second question is why and how must we reimagine our ambition for Canada's STI ecosystem given the polycrisis? And finally, what new thinking is needed by stakeholders to help Canada respond? And not surprisingly, the three questions in the poll do tend to pull along this. So against that backdrop, I'm going to turn to the first question, and my panelists only have one instruction, is try to keep your responses to each of these questions to the range of 3 or 4 minutes. And then I will see where I can pull threads if needed, with the idea that each of these conversations is about 15 minutes. So I'm going to join my colleagues at the seat here, and we'll get the conversation going. And we'll 1, 2, 3. Okay, and we need to hold these fairly close to the mouth here and speak loudly. But so I'm going to turn to Sue and begin the dialogue, Sue, with you about the concerns, what concerns you about it, and of course, never lose sight of the opportunities in a crisis. What's your thoughts on this first question, Sue?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much for this, and thank you for this conference. I'm a bit of an outsider, and let me just declare, I'm a recovering lawyer that found her way into healthcare and now into the innovation space. But here's why I did that, is because if Canada is going to be the kind of Canada we want for my children and grandchildren and all of their friends and all of your children and grandchildren, we're going to need to change the way we think in a lot of ways. And this whole issue of the polycrisis brings into sharp focus some of the areas where we have the greatest opportunity, the greatest risk. And so let me talk a little bit about innovation. I'll give the advertisement of the cluster later. Historically, innovation, so if I take the I part of the STI, has been characterized by 3 elements. First of all, what we call slingshot innovation. So slingshot investment. We will invest, whether it's public or private dollars, we will invest in your company. And we'll do lots of due diligence and lots of exploration on your company or your organization's focus and promises for what you're going to deliver with that investment. So that's one element that ripples through the entire innovation ecosystem. The second element is we invest in one, and then we invest in an idea. You have an idea of something that you're going to do. And by the way, I'm saying this not to be critical. It's just the way the innovation system works in many ways. So invest in your idea that might or might not lead to a product. But if you look at something like the SIF program, you go through great exercises in terms of what you want to solve or what you want to do, and then you get the investment, if you will, to take your idea into something. And then the third element is we're not particularly obsessed with speed when it comes to innovation. A lot of innovation investments go on not just for months, but for years. And those three things give me great concern. And what we need to do is change our thinking. And I do think that there are some places where this is happening with a fair degree of effect and speed. The first thing is the idea, and I just reflect back on your Einstein quote, and he's got a couple of other ones along the same line. The idea that we can solve issues as complex as the Polycrisis in a singular linear fashion is probably a bit naive, maybe even dangerous. And what we need to do is move into collaborative thinking, collaborative innovation, where we put people and organizations around a table that might not normally be at that table or even want to be at that table together. Because if I am prepared to listen to your perspective on a problem, I am more likely to come up with a different idea on a solution than if I just have a scintillating conversation with myself. And I don't mean that individually, although I do have those, but organizationally. So move from individual thinking to collaborative innovation, collaborative thinking. So that's one. Two, we have to be obsessed with results. I'm going to be really frank here. Canada is fascinated with process. Never confuse process with an outcome. And the degree to which we have that through our innovation ecosystem is mind-numbing to someone like me from the private sector. We've got to be obsessed with results. And then the third is speed. The world is not waiting for us. It is absolutely not waiting for us. And the number of times that I get calls from incredible small companies, SMEs, organizations that we've worked with that have huge potential, and the call goes like this: hey, I'm really sorry, but I want to give you a heads up. We're moving to Oklahoma. We're moving to Idaho. We're moving to Sweden. Why? Because it moves a lot faster. I can get things done. I can get regulatory approval. I can get plants set up. And you probably all know the White Claw story. If you don't know the White Claw story, here's the White Claw story. Anthony von Mandel, very well-known innovator out on the West Coast, the owner of Mission Hill Winery, but the founder of White Claw, the largest selling, alcoholic beverage, canned beverage in North America right now, wanted to establish his production facility in Canada. In fact, wanted to establish that facility on the West Coast. He's from the West Coast. And he looked at the regulatory approval process that was going to be somewhere between sort of 2 and 4 years just to get it, get it going. And then he phoned, and I'm going to get the state wrong, I should have looked it up. He phoned whatever it was, North Carolina or South Carolina, was met by the governor, went to the governor's offices, stayed for a day, came back a little bit later, stayed for a weekend, got the approval, and guess where White Claw is being produced now? Not in British Columbia. And there are thousands and thousands of stories like that in terms of, what am I worried about? In terms of opportunities, we have so many opportunities to change that thinking. I've taken up my time, so I'll come back to that in the answer to another question.
Thanks enormously. So lots to think about: results, speed, and we'll hear more about opportunities. Sherelle.
Hi. All right, so when I'm thinking about this idea of the global polycrisis and even just starting to wrap your head around it, I mean, you had the slide, it had all the different things that are going wrong in the world. And it's the same thing that we have an issue with when it comes to the world of media and journalism, is that when everything seems like bad news, people just tune out. Nobody wants to listen anymore. They go, oh, it's so depressing. Why don't you talk about good things? Oh, I don't want to, have this drag down my day. So I'm just not even going to engage with the news. I'm not going to engage with anything that you're talking about, even if it is necessary information that I need to make decisions about my life. I would just rather not know because it's depressing, which is very fair. So it's the same issue that we're grappling with. How do you make people tune in? You can't. You can't make them tune in. You can't make people engage. You just have to change what it is you're doing in such a way that when they do decide to turn back in, it is as accessible as possible. Even just thinking about, as a complete outsider to the world of science policy, aside from, what I've reported on or what we've covered, the first thing I heard when they said, oh, we're discussing the STI ecosystem, and I said, excuse me? And you've come to me, why? But it's things like that. People don't necessarily understand what it is that they're being told, what it is that they're hearing about, and how it affects their daily lives. So finding a way to remove the barriers, to do exactly what it is that I was hearing from the lunchtime panel, is like reduce that fragmentation, reduce that push to where people don't understand that it's affecting a citizen's daily life. That is one of the biggest issues, and it's also one of the biggest opportunities. We're in the business of information. Whether you're in the business of innovation, business of creation, it all kind of ties into the same thing. You can't arm yourself unless you have those necessary tools. You can't move forward unless you know what it is that you're doing and you know how to communicate that to people who need to hear it, whether that's the public or whether it's policymakers. Because it won't make any difference if the public and the policymakers refuse to engage. So that's something, like I said, we're grappling with. We have the issue, as well as people in this space, the science space, of there is a real, derision for experts and expertise and intelligence. People think that, oh, you went to university or you know what you're talking about. You must be, one of the enemies. So even that, finding a way to overcome those hurdles are difficult. So I don't want to kind of harp on some of those same topics, but I think we're going to come back to them. And of course, trust. How do you make people trust you? So again, expertise, people don't trust experts. Journalists, people don't trust the journalists who are trying to tell them about the work that the experts are doing. The experts don't trust the journalists to properly convey what it is that they are doing. So there's all of these barriers that we have to find ways to overcome, and we can only do that if we kind of decide that this is what we want, this is what we need going forward. So how can we just kind of get over it and get over the idea that the person on the other side of the microphone, the other side of the pen, the other side of the camera, the other side of the desk is somehow out to get me, and we can all move forward and work together.
Sherelle, powerful comments, and I think it comes back to this theme about new way of thinking, right? It's not about asking government to invest. It's about showing the impact to our citizens that shows relevance, and relevance leads to credibility, and credibility leads to trust, and trust leads to investment. That's kind of the sense of the new way of thinking. We talk about science communication, but there's not always a good news story coming out of science, right? I mean, it's not the machinery or the belief in the process. It's about results. And I play back to Sue's comments about results. Duncan, Duncan won.
You may have made a strategic error having the two Duncans sitting side by side in your gaze, because there's never two Duncans in any room. And if you say Duncan this way, you're going to get both of us. So I'm the bureaucrat on the panel, and I'm in the public good business. And my particular brand of public good is trying to support federal, but hopefully not just federal, hopefully broader scientists in the Canadian space to think about how they work and have better platforms to do work. So, I guess my take on what are the concerns about the global polycrisis are going to echo some of the things that each of you have said, which probably is a good thing. We're bureaucrats, but we're not always entirely disconnected. We can test that over the course of my remarks here. So if you think about sort of the fetal position, the ball, the blanket over the head, can we just make it all go away? When people get in that space, they may long for a simpler time. They may, as Sherelle said, reject some of the things that the experts are saying, and they may lose confidence, not just in the individual who's speaking, but in the institutions themselves. And as somebody who's in the public good business, that's probably my sort of biggest concern, is if people in a democratic system lose confidence in the ability of that system to be serving their public good because they're overwhelmed by all of these horrible things coming at them. That's a big, big problem. Now, I don't want to be too pessimistic because we may solve the global polycrisis today. I will allow that possibility. But if we don't, I think that's a really, really big, big concern. The second big concern actually is about the opportunities. We're focused on the crises. We've all spoken about all the things around that powerful, intimidating, fetal position-inducing slide. But we haven't focused necessarily quite so much on the global bit, which I'd like to focus on because we're all in this together. We're all going through all of this stuff together. So what that means is there will be a distribution. Some people will meet that challenge rather poorly. Some people will sort of meet it in an average way, and some people will meet it really, really well and thrive in this environment that is complex and challenging and that we're all in. And so the fear is, will we organize ourselves? Will we change thinking? Will we focus on, okay, fine, I'm a bureaucrat, I have to allow some respect for process, but will we focus on outcomes and changing the way we think instead of sort of slavish adherence to process, to be able to position ourselves better collectively to rise to the challenge? So coming from the federal system, Westminster model, it's very important to have clear lines of accountability. If everyone is responsible for everything, no one is responsible or accountable for anything. I understand and I appreciate and I respect that. But if we each try to only solve our own piece, which is the model that generally we kind of default to, I don't think we're going to do a very good job at tackling those issues. So the program that I'm involved with is about trying to bring people together in an intersectoral way where there's underlying core science to say, how can we approach solutions together? That has to happen in a much bigger way than my program can incent. It has to be more of a social level response involving all of these different sectors that are represented on the stage and not represented on the stage. So that's the opportunity. There's a massive opportunity because everybody's in it. And some people who know me will say I'm a little bit competitive. I don't like win-lose dynamics. It's not really who I am, but I am competitive. So I want us to do really well as Canada. Given that everybody's in this, how do we organize ourselves? How do we work with friends and partners to do the best that we possibly can in it?
Duncan, there's some important threads we're going to be pulling on here. The notion of coming together, right? The notion of coming together, federal, private sector, society, and tackling this with some sense of common purpose. That's a powerful thought. Duncan S.
30 years ago, I, having benefited from a great education in Canada, having grown up in an excellent middle-class family, and having had all of the opportunities that Canada had given to me, I decided to move to the US. And I went there for my PhD in physics at Stanford, and then I stayed there for another 10 years, working in one of the top research labs in the world at Hewlett-Packard. And I thought I was having a great time. It was absolutely fantastic. My partner and I had 2 daughters that were born there. And when they started going to school, we started asking ourselves, Where do we want these two incredible girls to grow up? And it forces a little bit of self-reflection about what Canada actually has. And we were living in Palo Alto, California, one of the highest per capita income places in the world. There are 2 train tracks there, commuter train that goes from San Jose all the way up to San Francisco, 2 tracks, goes back and forth. It's like the Toronto GO train. Works quite well. Not always like the Ottawa GO train. But the other side of the tracks was East Palo Alto. And while I was a student, East Palo Alto had the highest crime rate per capita in the United States. And it was literally the other side of the tracks. And this is in the Bay Area, which is one of the economic engines of the world. And so that disparity, it was really in your face. As a professional working, you live in a bubble, you think, hey, I have a great job, I'm going to ignore it. When young people come along into your life, you're actually forced to confront it. And that's when we made the decision to return to Canada. And we came here for the things that I think every person in this room values about the society. And I don't want to be pejorative about the United States. It's a fantastic place. I love it, and I loved living there, and I would be happy to live there again. But we moved back to Canada for a couple of reasons. And one is access to education, regardless of income. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. Access to healthcare, regardless of income. Not perfect, but pretty damn good. Access to affordable housing. Access to good jobs. Large middle class, okay? My concern about the Polycrisis is that the reasons that I moved back to Canada are now under threat. It's difficult to get a family doctor. The schools are not so equal anymore. There are quite a few private schools, for better or for worse, okay? And so my concern is that the things that we really, really care about are starting to break. I'm a very simple person. I operate by you realize physicists think they're the smartest scientists, but actually they reduce everything to a very, very simple model, which has 1 or 2 math equations, and then they think they're the smartest because they can solve simple models. So that's actually how I operate as well. And my simple model for Canada is, if we have enough money in the country, we'll be able to pay for these other things that I care about. So I'm most concerned in the global Polycrisis about Canada's decreasing productivity and us not being competitive globally, and us therefore not having the resources to deliver the things that I actually really care about.
Duncan, thanks enormously. You know, folks, the importance of storytelling, right? Thank you for sharing that personal experience here, Duncan. It does really resonate, I'm sure, with many in the room. I'm going to continue on with the same path here and go to the second question here of why and how must we reimagine our ambition for Canada's STI ecosystem in the face of the Polycrisis. So Sue, I'll give you the opportunity to start again.
Okay, thank you. And I'm so glad I didn't answer that second question because I want to pull on the string that you dangled there, Duncan. And so what are the opportunities? And I merged that into why and how must we reimagine our ambition. So I'm sitting there out in Burnaby, British Columbia, as the CEO of Life Labs, trying to do everything I can to transform the diagnostic sector. Some good, some not so good, trying to get your test results online, and how hard can that be? What can be hard? But we got it done, and the phone rings, and someone says, hey, would you like to look into being the CEO of one of the superclusters? And I was totally convinced they had the wrong number. And I'd never heard of the supercluster. I'd never heard of the policy. I didn't know what they were talking about. But I thought, let me dig into this. And what I saw in the public policy that gave rise to my interest in the organizations that were coming out of that policy was public policy that was addressing those issues that I mentioned early on. It was founded, the whole cluster policy, and by the way, this is not new to the world. There are lots of jurisdictions that have clusters. We're very late to the party, but it's new to Canada. And it's founded on collaborative innovation, bringing organizations that wouldn't normally be together around a table to solve some of society's and industry's biggest challenges. And so if we want to build the country that we want to build for our kids and our grandkids, we got to solve those big problems. And using the Einstein thing, we're not going to do it alone. We've got to do it together. It was focused on results, an obsession with results, and it was focused on speed. So I thought, I really don't have any experience in this space, and maybe that makes me a good person to get involved in this. And so what's happened? I mean, what have we reimagined and what have we done through these clusters? First of all, I'll just tell you there are 5 of them across the country. Each of us were given a different mandate. I don't know where the mandates came from, but ours is digital. And we each report into an independent board, and there's oversight, but not governance oversight. In ISET, it's more investment oversight. And so when your mandate is digital, there are others that have a mandate of manufacturing or oceans. Those are a little bit narrow. When your mandate is digital, you've got to be really, really focused. So we focused on what we consider to be 3 of the most important things to drive better productivity and better GDP per capita in this country. One is, quote unquote, addressing the health system. Secondly, capitalizing on our strengths. And the strengths in this country are natural resources. Wood, rocks, fish, water built this country, and we still have a lot to get out of that. And the third is skilling. If we don't have the talent properly skilled to take us forward in those other areas, it's just a pipe dream. So I'll give you 1 or 2 quick examples of of what we've done. We talk a lot about the energy transition. You can't do the energy transition without critical minerals. You can't swing a cat these days without hearing electronic vehicles, energy transition. Canada has a multitude of the major critical minerals that we need to do the energy transition with. That's lithium, cobalt, et cetera. And unfortunately, we can't access them because all the near surface minerals were extracted a long time ago. Some of these minerals are up to 1 kilometer in the earth, and that's not just in Canada, that's around the world. That's the kind of problem we floated out to our community of, we've got about 1,700 organizations we work with. And this is what happens. Phone rings, I get a call from a fellow who says, I used to work out at a research facility in British Columbia, and we built this thing called we built an X-ray machine, a super high-powered X-ray machine. We weren't quite sure what to do with it. And so he says, I think if we use muon tomography and capture the energy of cosmic, and he went on, and I really got lost in it. But he said, I think we can actually find a way to identify and measure ore bodies deep into the earth. That conversation took place in 2020 through the collaborative innovation model that started with this little company called Ideon Technology. We bolted on a little early stage mining company called Fireweed, bolted on a couple of tech companies around them. When BHP called and said, BHP, the largest mining company in the world, called and said, can we join this project? I thought we're onto something. Canada has now built the world's first Earth X-ray machine that can X-ray 1 kilometer into the Earth using muon tomography and identify the presence, absence, size, and density of ore bodies up to 1 kilometer into the Earth. That is now being used by 5 of the largest mining companies in the world. So is that an opportunity for Canada? You bet it is. Has that company grown? Has it hired more people? It's grown 400% in the last 2 years. And the trajectory is just going up. So that, that's the opportunity, and that's how we reimagine. We reimagine by giving ourselves permission to think differently. Permission to think differently and act differently. I'll give you one other quick example if I can, and this is in the health space. World Health Organization pretty much every year publishes the top global health threats in the world. Right around 2020, and we send those out to our community. Around end of 2020, one of the items on the top global health threats was antimicrobial resistance, AMR. Even if you're not in the medical space, you know what that is. It's the evolution of pathogens such that they evade antibiotics, and that global health threat is predicted to kill 10 million people a year by 2030 if we don't address it. So we put that out there, and I unfortunately named it as a life sciences issue, and I got a call from a young fellow in Vancouver, And he said, first of all, it's not a life sciences issue. It's a data issue. I'm like, okay. And he goes, I know how we can address it. I'm like, okay. Because he thinks it's a data issue. And we put organizations around this small, innovative company, and these are young people that are thinking this way. And I'll fast forward through the exercise. At the end of 2022, we announced the world's first data system that allows healthcare professionals anywhere on the planet to access up-to-date prescribing guidelines for all of the top pathogens within about a 30-day accuracy. We then got a call from the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization said, we've looked into this technology. We want to adopt it worldwide. In fact, it's the only technology that we will adopt worldwide. That technology is now in every country in the world, with the exception of North Korea, from Canada. Do we celebrate that? Have you ever heard of it? No, you've never heard of it. Has it ever been announced? Not in any significant way. So the opportunity is right within our hands. We've got the researchers, we've got industry partners, we've got government partners that are prepared to step in and think differently and address those issues I talked earlier about speed, results, and collaborative thinking, and create world-first technologies. And my hope and prayer is that we will start to be really proud about these things across Canada. We'll start to celebrate them and get the messages out there. We've got about 177 products in the market right now. So how much time have you got? We've got technologies that would blow your mind and make you very, very proud as Canadians. So
Thanks.
that the opportunity is to continue to do that, and how we reimagine and how we change the ambition around our STI system is through those three elements.
Thanks, Sue. Again, the power of storytelling. To pull the thread, the research organization to help with muon tomography, Triumph. So the story continues. Sherelle?
But as I was just listening to Sue talk there, and I thought to myself, yeah, that's interesting about how you don't hear about these things. And then I thought, all right, coming at it from a journalism perspective, if I sent an email or made a phone call tomorrow to anybody who's in this room who's an expert in their field, and I said, hey, I see that you're doing great work. Can you talk to me about it? How many of you are actually going to talk to me? How many of you are going to talk to me right then and there and not have to go and get approval from so-and-so and then vet the questions and then get approval on the answers and then have somebody listening in on the other line from the PR department and then want to see the story before, which is not a good thing. So don't even ask to see stories before they're published. But there's all of these things that stand in the way of getting this information out there. And it's something that we see in the political realm. I mean, it's the same thing. You want to talk to, an MP about their own private member's bill that they've put together. And all of a sudden now they've clammed up because they can't talk to you about it. Or you want to say, hey, I hear you're doing good work about XYZ. And now they can't talk to you because their party doesn't want them to talk to the media. There's all these various barriers that get in the way of people actually being able to learn about and find ways to connect with the work that's being done could ultimately help their own lives. But the idea of reimagining is something that's really interesting to me because it's something that everybody's working on. And just last weekend, I was at a conference. It was about reimagining political journalism. So it's the same question. How do we get to a place where the work that we do is received better, or we can do it better, or it fits into the current time and place that we're in? And I think one of the things that does keep coming up in various sectors and various industries is there's an inability to kind of agree on what the problem is or what the underlying causes of the problem are. Because over the last decade or so, or at least probably longer, but it's probably become more apparent in the last decade or so. There's been a noticeable shift to, information being siloed, various social media platforms, whether you want to call it the alternative facts that became more common during the first Trump administration, or you want to go back to, Stephen Colbert's idea of truthiness. Even before that, people now have even more ability to look at things that just align with their own worldview or what they think is the case. So how do you break through that? And again, we come back to that idea of trust. I mean, if I asked you now, who do you trust in your life? Is it your doctor? Is it a lawyer? Is it a business person that that you're going to trust them not to screw you over? Like, who is it that you trust? And if you can't trust them because of whatever you think their business practices are, whatever you think their politics may be, that becomes a real issue. You were talking about earlier about that idea of having a national asset. And the first thing that came to my mind was, okay, if you want a national asset, who's going to be in charge of it and who's going to fund it? Because I guarantee you, in the current climate that we're in, depending on who kind of pulls the trigger on it, that's now going to become politicized. It's going to be, if it comes in under a conservative government, it's going to be a conservative project and therefore it's bad. If it comes in under a liberal government, it's going to be a liberal project and therefore it's bad. You can't trust, anybody who happens to be on another side of a political aisle or somewhere otherwise on the political spectrum. And those are the types of things I think that as you look forward and think about, okay, well, how can we reimagine that? You have to, I think, start with transparency. You have to, and that does include process. Yes, we do linger a lot on process in this country, and it is really difficult to get things done. And that's an issue that, like I said, we're grappling with in journalism as well. By the time we've caught on to a new technology, the people who are using it or the audience, they've already moved on to the next one. So you still have to tell people what it is you're doing, why it is you're doing it, and why they should care, because this is how it's going to make their lives essentially better or different, or they might be scared of the fact that it's going to make their lives different, but this is, shining a light towards what could be. If we want to talk about the idea of solutions, you still have to look back at the past to say, okay, here's what didn't work, so how can we move forward? And a lot of that has to do with understanding the process and understanding why the process has to change.
Cheryl, there's at least a half a dozen threads to pull on in your comments there. I hope people were taking notes. The fact that we actually share a similar set of issues with the journalism community in Canada is a bit of a gobsmack. And to say maybe there's insights together. I'm also struck by the whole theme of physician, heal thyself. How many of these issues of understanding society, which is expertise in our social sciences, that we don't turn on helping ourselves get better? I think there's enormous opportunity there. So thanks you, Sherelle. Great challenge. In terms of trust, I can trust my 2 dogs to wake me up at 7 a.m. to say, feed me. So Duncan.
So how do we reimagine our ambition for the ecosystem in the face of the polycrisis? I think there's sort of 2 keys to it from where I am. And I agree with what the speakers before me said. So I think the first thing is to stop focusing on the crisis and shift it back to that first conversation or question, what is the opportunity? So that's the first bit, because if you focus too much on the crisis side of it, you're going to turtle. And that's not going to be productive, and it's not going to be inspiring, which is the second bit. We're not going to be able to solve these things unilaterally or bilaterally or trilaterally. It's a poly solution. So it needs to be collective. And the tendency is to go back into the individual and what's in it for me. The world's too complicated. I can't trust, to some of the things that, other panelists here have said. So we have to have something that we can be inspired about and understand and see it as a collective. And the STI ecosystem, we should be seeing as the core driver for GDP per capita and the things that we really value that this country was built on, and that hopefully its future will continue to grow from. So what are some things, if we go back to the idea of storytelling, what are some of the stories and narratives that can inspire collective understanding and collective action? Because a lot of the things that we talk about, like as soon as you said, as soon as the caller said "mew on to you," it's like wah 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 wah. But what was the impact of, like, the impact is inspiring. So I think that one of the things that we need to do, the people in this room and the people we work with, need to figure out better ways, relatable ways, honest ways, not PRE has it been vetted by everyone ways of actually telling what's the thing that we're doing, what's the opportunity, what's the potential, what's the vision. So there have been earlier sessions I know that have focused on something that I'm super excited about and embarrassed only have awoken to recently, which is the North. So what are the potential? What's the opportunity? There's lots of risks. There's lots of challenges. There's lots of considerations around the North in Canada. But the opportunity that holds in so many different ways for Northerners, but for the rest of the people down south in Canada who see what the North means and can be attracted to that, linking that up with science, technology, and innovation to help mitigate some of the horrific impacts of climate change that are happening to the ecosystems and the people. That's a challenge that's kind of, I think it's easy to sort of wrap your head around and say, no, that's worth supporting. So how do we find these stories? How do we find these themes that help people want to have a vision, to want to be ambitious instead of afraid, and to want to work together instead of heading for the bunker?
Duncan, Friday, November 22nd, you heard it. From the polycrisis to the polysolution. Well stated here. Duncan S.
Thanks. So I'd like to pick up on Sue's comment of some world-class Canadian science at Tri-University Mise-en facility, turning into a company. And that for me is illustrative, and I'm going to use that to talk about the numbers and then a way I'd like to suggest of reframing how we think of the goals of the STI system. So in that case, a piece of Canadian world-class science for which, if you read the Council of Canadian Academies reports for the last 5 years or 10 years ago or 15 years ago, Canada generates between 4 and 4.5% of the world's science by citation. And we should pat ourselves on the back because that's actually fantastic. Canada is only 2% of the developed world population. So we are actually producing twice as much world-class science as most of the rest of the developed world, which is incredible, actually. It's an incredible story of how our S, I don't know about the T and I, but how our S system is actually functioning extremely well. The conversion rate, however, is what we've talked about. We have an example where it did get converted, and I think we should celebrate that because it actually doesn't happen that much. Canada currently produces less than 1% of the world's intellectual property. Now, that's not a perfect measurement for conversion, but it's a proxy. How are we turning all of that world-class science into technology and companies? It's somewhere around this 1% mark, which means we're producing less technology than other developed countries. So I'd like to pause there. What if, first of all, I think obviously we should aspire to be at least a 2% country on a number of angles. But even if we get to 2%, the converse of 2% is 98. And what that means is that if you are the mayor of a Canadian city, like Calgary, and you have a public transit problem to solve, there's a 98% chance that the technology you need might be somewhere else in the world. If you're the chief of defense staff of the Canadian Armed Forces, there is a 98% chance that the technology you need to guarantee that men and women putting themselves at risk are as well equipped as possible, there's a 98% chance that technology will be found outside of Canada. So I think we need to divide or reframe the STI conversation about how do we use our expertise to import the right technology at the right time for those Canadian problems? And that's a critical skill. Canada's actually not bad at it. We're pretty good at importing stuff. We need to become better. And then the other piece of the problem, which is the one that personally concerns me the most, is how do we get this 1% up to 2%? And what does it mean if Canadians invent only 2% of the world's technology? How does that feed into our domestic dialogue about our sustainable prosperity if we're only inventing this 2%? That's the way I'd like to reframe the goals of the STI system: importing the right stuff and then exporting what we're really good at.
A powerful thread there, folks. It's this idea that it's not only about generating technology, it's about harnessing technology through innovation that can also make a difference. I think that's the theme you're building on, Stuart. We've got, Duncan, we've got one more question, and I'm going to ask our panelists to try to keep it to about 2 minutes. I'm going to put you on the spot to give you first word again here, Sue. We seem to be on a row going left to right here, and just to make sure, and I just ask people to have a look at that poll and begin to consider how you'd like to respond to it. Fairly simple, and hopefully you can get that completed. Sue, you want to lead off with the question 3 here?
Is that a question or a direction? I think that was a direction. Is that a direction?
I'm sorry? Yeah.
Question or direction? Yeah, sure. And I'm going to slipstream again behind Duncan's comments there. So, you know, what new thinking is needed? We're all on the same team. I think I've said this already. We are all on the same team, whether we are researchers, whether we're venture capitalists, whether we're reporters, whether we're politicians, or whether we're government agencies. I say we need to all be on the same team if the objective is to build the best possible Canada that we can for our children and grandchildren. If we don't have that as our objective in life, then what are we doing? So if our objective is to build the best possible Canada, we're not going to do it on our own. Industry's not going to do it on its own. Researchers aren't going to do it on its own. Regulators aren't going to do it either. I come at all of these conversations with the mindset that we are trying to build the best Canada. And if we have that mindset, some of the cynicism and some of the distrust that you hear and maybe experience can actually fall away. Now, having made that comment, you're all going to think that I'm incredibly naive because there's a large building just down the street here where none of that is happening. But let's just put that aside for a minute and control what we can control, which is our own mindset. We can't control the mindset of anybody else's. So if we control the mindset that the people that we engage with are actually trying to do the right thing for the right reasons in the right way, then maybe we're onto something here. And that's foundational to what we do at the cluster. And I'll just give one more example in terms of the new thinking and how it can impact. And I have to pick up my book here because there's way too many organizations involved in this next project that I can't remember them all off by heart. But one of the very significant issues in the world is the ability to share health data while still protecting the individual sensitivities around that health data. But the actual data, not who you got it from and what their name and address is, the data is incredibly powerful. And that's a problem that was presented to us in the context of autism. Autism, a global issue, and can we try and build a data system that can address that. So I'm going to tell you who signed up for this challenge when we floated it out. Genome BC, Genome Quebec, Genome Ontario, Genome Prairie, Genome Canada, Roche, Sick Kids, PacBio, Integrate AI, Centre for Genetics and Policy, Global Alliance for Genome and Health, Holland Bloorview Research Institute, Public Health Agency of Canada, and the University of New Brunswick. Not a small group came around that issue. Canada built the world's first federated health data system that is now being deployed, not in Canada, but is now being deployed in various jurisdictions. So the new thinking is that we can actually do this. I sit on the board of Own the Podium, and I'm just going to give you my little speech that I quite often get. At Own the Podium, you sit around there and you talk about how can we get Canadian athletes on the podium so that we can have the parade down Main Street and we can all turn our TVs on our phone and cheer the gold medalists. What if we had the same attitude towards industry success? To Duncan's point, what if we had the same attitude when we have Canadian companies hitting the headlines because they've developed a new product, they've attracted new investment, they've gone into a partnership, and we have that same kind of pride and excitement around the success of Canadian industry. And it's absolutely at our fingertips because we have some of the best research in the world happening in this country. We just need to work together to commercialize it and then celebrate the success of these companies that we produce as a result of commercializing the research. And if we can have that mindset that we have way more going well than going poorly when it comes, hopefully you're not videoing me, but anyhow, maybe you are, FaceTime video. But if we have the same kind of pride and excitement around the collaboration and the success that can happen when we combine our researchers with our industry sectors, we can own the podium as well. And we have to do that for the sake of our kids and our grandkids.
Thanks, Sue. From me to we, passion matters. And it plays back to this notion of the poly solution. So thank you for that. Sherelle?
I agree a lot with what Sue said. I also want to, it's going to sound like I'm disagreeing, but I am actually agreeing. So picking up on what Duncan was saying about kind of the domestic dialogue, one of the things that we often hear is, oh, like, why don't you talk about the good things? Like, there's no good news. Like, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, we're doing poorly, or, you know, Canada's only producing that 1%. So, you know, why bother, and snake eating its tail sort of thing. You have to be truthful. You have to be accurate. You know, just being a cheerleader and just being a homer isn't going to fix the problem, because then people won't engage with the fact that there is a problem that needs fixing. So yes, absolutely celebrate the successes, celebrate the wins, but don't sweep the problems under the rug. So I think we need a balance of the two. And I think is kind of that thinking that is needed by everybody. And yes, everybody has to be in it, thinking about that. They're all in it for the same purpose, which is to move the country forward. Just don't dumb it down for people. One of the things that we consistently hear in my line of work is, oh, well, nobody cares about like jurisdiction and stuff like that. They just want to see results. They just want things to get done. They want the money in their pocket. They want, the laws passed. They want, health care. Well, jurisdiction does matter. There are various things and various orders of government that are responsible for certain things. And so just using that as an example, if we just kind of blur all those lines and try to pretend it doesn't exist, well, then nothing's actually going to get done, because the wrong people are going to be held accountable or not held accountable. So the only thing I would really add to say in conclusion of that is just that, yes, you do need new thinking, but you also have to work to explain and to help people understand what thinking underlies what's already there, where the gaps are, and what we need to do to move forward.
Yeah, we talk about trust, and elements of getting to trust are honesty, integrity, right? Truth-telling. Powerful that we keep sight of that as well. Duncan.
New thinking needed by stakeholders to help Canada respond. I think it is the me to we thinking in the way that we conduct research, whether it's economic or regulatory, and execute the science in both of those domains, which we do inside the federal system and beyond in other parts. It is, though, really important to understand the broader and to participate in the broader as opposed to just doing yours, and for that to be accepted by the system as well. So the bosses up the line also have to think that's a good thing for the level of collaboration to take place, so on and so forth that we've been talking about. The other type of thinking that I think we need by stakeholders is more broad thinking, to pick up on an early theme. So stakeholders define more broadly, we have to valorize science, technology, and innovation a little bit more and make it a goal that's relatable, that actually does connect to people's quality of life. And that's a tall ask, because the kind of stuff we're doing here is on a decade time scale, oftentimes before that GDP per capita goes up and we can afford to hire a few more kindergarten teachers. But Canadians aren't dumb, and I do think that we, to Sherelle's point, there's a way to have that discussion without dumbing it down, and to anchor a lot of our prosperity on, it comes from resources, but to be more than hewers of wood and drawers of water, to actually use the STI ecosystem to thrive in the more complicated world that's before us. Like, we have to see that as the goal, and as a goal that's attainable through working together.
Duncan, it just strikes me that surely that has to be a sellable message to politicians, right? Who ultimately are focused on their constituencies. So
I'm just a bureaucrat, Bob.
Okay, Duncan, final word.
Sure. So in the spirit of the Polycrisis, I want to be clear that when we are thinking about this 98% versus 2%, it's not either or. We need to do both. We need to import technology from around the world. That import will accelerate our own technology. And then when we do generate our own technology, like the muon detection of heavy ores underground, we need to use that domestically and then celebrate it and export it to the rest of the world. Very clear. When we confuse those two, however, then I think we get into trouble. If we set up a program to say, I need to solve public transit for Toronto, and I can only use Canadian vendors. That's actually the wrong answer. It's a nice goal to aspire to, but it's wrong. And that's a confusing approach. So the framing I would like to say is, let's make sure we're solving Canadian problems in the best way possible by importing whatever we need. And whenever we come up with a Canadian solution that's good for the world, let's celebrate that and export the hell out of it. That's sort of the approach. On that second piece, now there are two strategies there, and we also need not to confuse them. One strategy is to cluster your effort in a supercluster or in other areas around something that you think is a strength. This is the national strategy of Taiwan and the Netherlands, for example. It's a viable national strategy. Canada has, in the last 50 years, not done so well at that, but we're trying, and it's something that we do need to do. The other strategy is the Thousand Flowers Bloom strategy. Again, it's not either or. We need both. But you do need to be clear about why you're pursuing which and what your strategic intent is when you're pursuing that. I am particularly optimistic about the Thousand Flowers Blooming because I think we're entering a different age of innovation on the planet. It's the first time in human history that you can take a company like OpenAI, which is now worth, I think, $170 billion, and it's less than 10 years old. Tesla, which is less than 20 years old, is worth more than all of the next 10 automakers. So that was not true in the 20th century. 20th century was dominated by large multinational incumbent hegemonies, basically. We're in a different era. And this different era actually speaks to Canada's strengths. We have the scientific basis, and all we need to do is convert more of that science into these small companies that, for the first time in history, can grow very, very rapidly into medium-sized companies and large companies.
So, comment?
Yeah, just if I can just pull on the Thousand Flowers, which I love the Thousand Flowers strategy, but can I add a maybe friendly amendment? Let's see. If we're going to have a Thousand Flowers strategy, then we have to have a Thousand Flowers adoption and commercialization and deployment domestically. Because what we see a lot, and I've seen it before the current role I have, is that we invest a huge amount of effort and dollars into building a company from 2 people to 10 people. And then when that company has technology that is viable, that's, at a right TRL level, that's in the commercial market, it gets picked up. And I'll give you an example. We've got technologies that are in England, the Netherlands, Sweden, Brazil, half of the US, and 1 hospital in Toronto. And if you want to get it in British Columbia, you get to go through a dozen procurement processes and another dozen if you want to get it into some other jurisdiction. So if we want to bring the 1,000 flowers into a full-blown, I don't know what the analogy is, but a full-blown garden, then we have to adopt and deploy the technologies they produce domestically.
Bob, I can't resist myself, but I love that we're using an agricultural analogy for Canada's STI ecosystem. So I'm going to stretch it a little further and say, we are good at the 1,000 flowers blooming. What actually matters, forgive me, are the beanstalks that grow. And we're not that good at growing the beanstalks. And forgive me again, Canada does have quite a bit of fertilizer. So I think we should start deploying it appropriately
100%.
on the beanstalks.
100%.
Folks, wow, how many threads to pull on in this conversation. A big thank you to our panelists. How are we doing with the poll back there? Here we go. So how concerned are you about the polycrisis and the, I think we have some north of 60% saying very concerned and concerned 30%. So we're at the 90% level that this is an issue. Now, let's not get into the fetal position, right? This is a context. Let's move on to the next question. I think it's coming. Yeah. How urgent do you believe it is that we reimagine Canada's STI ecosystem? And if I add together the urgent and the very urgent, folks, I'm at 80%. That sounds like a pretty good consensus in polling, wouldn't you say, Sherelle? Yeah, marginal. Okay. Fair enough. And if we move to the last question, which stakeholders are likely to have the greatest difficulty? And I believe we see a blue barrier there, which is a blue bar called governments. And it's perhaps where we need to focus effort. And interestingly, closely followed by all of the above. And that's perhaps insightful because it plays a bit to the theme of from me to we, that we all have a recognition that we're on a journey that's going to require us all to adapt. And that's going to be a journey that we need to do together from me to we. So thank you for that. Now, we have about 10 minutes left for a few questions from the audience. Sorry that I failed as a moderator to give you more time to pose your questions. They're telling me I've got 8 minutes. So let's go. I'm going to stand up here so I can see folks here, but I'll go one here, okay? Over here, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Marc Nantel. I'm the VP Research at Niagara College, and I'm a physicist too. So I think the solution, in order to get the solution to our problem, we have to start with a perfectly spherical chicken that's frictionless and then work from there. I think there's only one part of the problem that I see, and there's lots of other parts that we can reimagine. And it was mentioned a little bit by Duncan S. at the end, is not the 1,000 flower bloom, but the other one. I think we sometimes have difficulty choosing to invest in what we think might end up being winner. I'm not going to say choosing winners, because you don't choose winner, you choose potential winners, and some of them don't end up like that. We had great examples today. The Global Innovation Clusters, I think that's the new name, right? Were decisions to choose subjects, and try to put emphasis on it. The Triumph, or the Canadian Light Source, or the other facilities, another example where we put a lot of money in one place and try to be excellent. And they own the podium is another example. But in each case, you choose potential winners. And when I worked in the United States at the University of Michigan, it was a science and technology center where the American government dumped 11 million there and says, be excellent. When I came back to Canada, my field is optics. When I came back to Canada, we had network centers of excellence where everybody gets $30,000 a year. It's like, yeah, you're not really going to be excellent on $30,000 a year. Even the recently decided lab to market contest, it had to be national. It can't always be national. It can't always be the peanut butter spread as thinly as possible. The 1,000 Blooms example that we got were all companies. They weren't research centers or universities. Maybe when we do try to find winners in that sector, we actually have to try to find winner and not spread the peanut butter.
Great comment. I think that plays to your first remark here, Sue. Focus on results, right?
Yeah, no, I'm all with you there. That, we've got to package up the peanut butter, and you know what? And I'm going to pick on something that Sherelle said earlier about people, they want to make sure that everything's checked 16 times over, and what are your sources? At some point, we've got to get out of our risk averse cushion, and if the best XYZ company is in the middle of Saskatchewan or in Nova Scotia, okay, we don't have to try and find the second and third and fourth best in each of the regions across Canada, so we all have one, and that comes back to us as citizens, because when public policy makers are doing the peanut butter thing, I think they're trying to appease the voters or the citizens. And so at the end of the day, it comes down to us that we encourage investment where it's best for Canada, not necessarily best for me.
Great.
I should probably make a correction there. When I moved back to Canada with my partner and our daughters 15 years ago, I had the privilege to spend 10 years in the incomparable National Research Council of Canada. And it was amazing, but I got frustrated. I got frustrated with this idea that we were generating this science and not converting it into technology the way I had seen happen in the 15 years I spent in Silicon Valley. And so I moved to where I am now, the Business Development Bank of Canada, and helped create that venture fund that I also am privileged to participate in right now. What does venture capital do? It finds the beanstalk and it adds fertilizer. That's why I went there. The 1,000 flowers, that's the start of the system. But then when one of them starts to grow, the investment ecosystem, private sector investment ecosystem, is laser focused on helping identify those beanstalks and then grow them. I think that to me is a big piece of the possible solution.
And if we could take that into the public sector domain so that my taxpayers' dollars are invested with the same kind of laser focus, then we'd have something to celebrate.
I'll leave that to my colleague, Duncan.
It seems to me there's a threat of a panel for next year's CSPC here. Over here, question, please.
John Burnett with the National Research Council. Great panel. Great to see friends both on stage and with this organization. I'm going to just ask a very quick question, moving to the world of kind of recommendations, because this is the regular conversation. I'd just ask each of the panelists, if you could, top 2, 3, et cetera, recommendations you could make to help us, own the podium, so to speak, to convert, great research outputs to technology, to bigger firms. We've heard different ideas, prioritization, goal setting, culture change, encouraging entrepreneurship. Elon Musk is a Canadian citizen who went to school in Canada. What do you see as your top 2 to 3 suggestions that we should be focused on to try to own the podium in this respect?
Great question. Thanks, John. Who'd like to? You want to try that, Sue? You wanted to? Sherelle, go ahead.
I'll start because I really only just have one, and that is don't be afraid to talk about it. So don't circle the wagons. Don't wait until everything's perfect and everything's shiny. Talk about it. Be open with it, and don't fear public attention or speaking to somebody about what it is that you're doing, because we do want to know, and I think the public wants to know.
Thank you. Any other, Duncan?
I just want us to stop confusing what is good for solving a Canadian social problem, which I would put into the 98% category, and what is good for ensuring Canada's economic prosperity that I would put into the 2% category.
But just pulling on that, I'm not sure if I'm agreeing or disagreeing. I think it's think like a country, not like a region or a city or a province when you're thinking about investment. Think like a country, because we're a pretty small country.
I would agree exactly with what Sue just said. It's to be ambitious. It's to think big. We're a country and we're a G7 economy, and we've got all of this science expertise under us. You know, we shouldn't be talking about an investment of 30,000 here, an investment of 30,000 there. I don't think. This is something that has the potential to be very transformative. So if we see it for its medium and long-term strategic import, yeah, focus on results as discussed earlier. That's important too. But this is an area where we probably should invest.
One more question. Thanks, folks. Can I do one more question here? Okay, one more question.
Thanks a lot. My name is Anu Shukla-Jones. I'm from BioCanRx. My question is a little bit of an opposite question to the one that was just asked. What I've heard so much today was about things that we should do and things that the ways that we should think and how to come together. And I'm curious about what we have to give up. What are the trade-offs? What do we have to sacrifice? What do we need to, we can't have a conversation with so many different perspectives and voices and not ask for compromise. And so I guess I'm looking for your views on what does compromise look like? What do we need to not fund anymore? What do we not incent anymore in order to redirect and pivot towards things that we should be doing, as this conference has spoken so much about?
Please, Duncan.
So I'll give a simple illustration from my world. So Laboratories Canada is our program, and we're building new platforms for federal scientists and beyond federal scientists to work together. And the basic bargain is you get to have a new platform to do impressive work, the work that you can do that you're doing in facilities that really oftentimes aren't that impressive today. But you've got to share. So you don't get your fill in the blank anymore, you get our fill in the blank. So it's the idea of actually working together more so. You still have objectives that you're doing, but you're talking with others, you're being a more active part of an ecosystem where you're working together and sharing together more. I think that's the bigger trade-off than just saying we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. We're just going to do it in a way that is more efficient and where the whole, in terms of science outcomes, should be greater than the sum of the parts.
Any other comments? Sue?
Yeah, and just slipstreaming behind that, I'll just give one example, and I'm probably going to get shot for saying this, but you know, we've got to stop being the quintuplets or the septuplets and do, you know, we're going to do one in Pacific, we're going to do one in the prairies, we're going to do two in Ontario, one in Quebec, and one in Atlantic Canada. And as Canadians, we have to realize that if we do one investment of a more significant level, regardless of the geography, that's good for all of us. And that doesn't mean that everything, I'll just do the West Coast thing, that doesn't mean that everything's in Ontario. But it needs to be that these programs, whether they're genomic centers or whether there's any other ones, we don't have to do 5 of them, one in every region, or 7 of them. Let's do one, and let's concentrate the investment, concentrate the expertise, and concentrate the focus, and be good with that.
Thank you, folks. I'm going to draw this to a conclusion. And wow, it's a challenge to summarize this, but a few of the key takeaways here is that we can have this. It's from polycrisis to polysolutions. It's through from me to we, that we can move beyond ingredientism to larger outputs. Why? Because we've done it. Be proud and be loud. So we've created, I hope, a discussion that's given you pause for thought. This idea of recalibrating the ambition isn't something we start by telling others, it's something that we start by telling each other. So with this, we can collectively move forward. Thank you for your attention. Could you join me in a round of applause for this outstanding panel? Thank you.